Uh, I was a member when I was a kid. I was a junior NRA member.
At 80 years old, Tom Selleck has finally reached a point in life where silence no longer feels necessary. For decades, he was known as the calm, steady presence in Hollywood, the man with the mustache, the symbol of quiet strength. But behind that composed image was a story he rarely spoke about, a story involving timing, vulnerability, and a woman Hollywood never forgot, Sally Field. This was never a scandal. There were no headlines screaming betrayal, no shocking confessions whispered to tabloids, and yet the truth about Sally Field lingered in the background of Tom Selleck's life for over 40 years, not because it was painful, but because it was deeply human. Before the fame, before the global recognition, before Magnum PI turned him into an icon, Tom Selleck was still searching, not just for success, but for identity. And when Sally Field entered his life, it happened at a moment when everything was uncertain, fragile, and unfinished. Now, looking back with the clarity that only age can bring, Thomas Selleck speaks not with regret, but with honesty. And what he reveals is not what people expected. It's quieter, softer, and far more powerful. This is the story of the man before the legend, the love that wasn't meant to last, but was never meant to be forgotten. Long before Hollywood ever knew his name, Thomas Selleck's life followed a very different path. There were no childhood plans of red carpets or flashing cameras. Instead, his early years were shaped by structure, responsibility, and quiet determination. Born in Detroit in 1945 and raised in Southern California, Selleck grew up with a natural confidence and a strong physical presence. Tall, athletic, and calm by nature, he gravitated toward sports, not acting. Basketball became his focus, earning him a scholarship to the University of Southern California, where he studied business administration. Hollywood was nearby, but it wasn't calling his name yet. Like many men of his generation, his life was interrupted by service. During the Vietnam War era, he served in the California Army National Guard. That experience didn't make him louder or harder. It made him steadier. It reinforced values that would define him for the rest of his life: duty, humility, and respect for ordinary working people. When he finally turned toward acting, success didn't come quickly. The 1970s were filled with auditions, commercials, minor television appearances, and more rejection than encouragement. Roles slipped away. Opportunities vanished at the last moment. He was close often, but never close enough. What separated him from so many others was patience. He didn't chase fame. He prepared for it. Each setback refined him, grounding his expectations and strengthening his resolve. These years taught him something most stars never learn early enough. Fame is temporary, character is not. By the end of the decade, he was still largely unknown, still struggling, still married, and still unsure where his life was heading. It was during this emotionally unsettled chapter, just as one marriage was ending and his future remained unclear, that Sally Field entered his world, and that timing would change everything. By the late 1970s, Thomas Selleck had done everything the right way. He had worked, he had waited, he had endured rejection without becoming bitter, and yet success still felt like a door that refused to open. Then, in 1980, everything changed. He was cast as Thomas Magnum in Magnum PI, and the transformation was instant. Overnight, Tom Selleck wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a cultural symbol. The mustache, the Hawaiian shirts, the Ferrari, the relaxed charm that somehow carried emotional weight beneath it. On the surface, Magnum was fun, confident, almost effortless. But what made audiences stay wasn't the style, it was the soul. Selleck played Magnum as a man filled with contradiction. Charming, but wounded. Funny, but loyal to the point of pain. A strong, yet quietly vulnerable. The kind of man who could make you laugh in one scene, then break your heart in the next without raising his voice. The show became one of the most beloved television dramas of its era, running 8 seasons. Selleck earned major recognition, including an Emmy, and he cemented himself in television history. But here's what most people never fully understand about sudden fame. It doesn't just lift you up, it pulls you apart. Because while the world was celebrating Tom Selleck's arrival, his personal life was entering a complicated transition. He had recently separated from his first wife, Jaqueline Ray, and was still figuring out what life looked like outside of that marriage. Not shattered, not broken, but unsettled, unfinished, emotionally in between. And then came Sally Field. She wasn't just another celebrity crossing his path. She was warm, intelligent, already adored by America, and somehow she felt real in a world built on performance. Their romance began around 1979, at the exact moment his life was shifting faster than he could control. Tom would later admit that this timing mattered more than people realize. Because when you're rebuilding yourself after a marriage, you don't always have the same space for love, even if the love is genuine. And their connection was genuine. They weren't moving away from each other in anger, they were moving forward in different directions at different speeds, with different storms approaching. By the time Tom Selleck and Sally Field were romantically linked, Sally wasn't just another actress. She was already a familiar face to millions of Americans. Someone audiences felt like they knew. Her early fame had come from light, memorable roles. First as the sweet girl next door in Gidget, then as the quirky, innocent nun in The Flying Nun. She had the kind of warmth that made people trust her instantly. But behind that public image was a woman fighting to be taken seriously, determined to prove she was more than a cheerful television personality. In a strange way, Tom Selleck and Sally Field were living parallel lives, just at different stages. Sally had already reached a level of recognition. Tom was still climbing, still aiming for the moment she had already tasted. And maybe that difference made their bond feel even more honest. They weren't pretending to be perfect. They were both in motion, both changing, both trying to become something deeper than what the world expected. They moved within the same orbit throughout the 1970s, surrounded by the same industry pressure, the pressure to escape typecasting and build something lasting. Even their paths crossed in the most unexpected pre-fame corners of television history. Shows like The Dating Game, not necessarily the same episode, but close enough to feel almost symbolic. Like life had been circling them around each other long before it finally connected the dots. Tom would later look back on that and almost laugh at the irony. When you're young, you do whatever work you can get. You don't realize which moments are going to matter later. You don't know which small chapters will become part of your legend. And then suddenly, it's 1980. Tom lands Magnum PI and the world tilts. The laid-back charm that made him stand out became his prison too. Schedules, public attention, relentless demands. Fame didn't arrive slowly. It hit like a wave. And waves don't ask if you're ready. Meanwhile, Sally was evolving fast. her career about to enter a critically acclaimed era, one that would eventually bring Oscars and performances that destroyed every stereotype people once placed on her. So while the connection between them was real, the world around them was moving faster than love could keep up with. Tom later described it in a way that felt painfully simple. They weren't breaking apart with a drama. They were just being pulled forward. No scandal, no bitterness, no betrayal, just timing. And that's what makes their story haunt people, because it wasn't ruined by something ugly. It was ruined by life. When Tom Selleck looks back on Sally Field now, he doesn't talk like a man haunted by mistakes. He talks like a man who understands timing, who understands what it means to meet someone good at the wrong moment. Because the truth is, Tom didn't enter that relationship as a man fully free. He had recently come out of a marriage, not shattered, not bitter, but still adjusting to who he was outside of it. And people often underestimate what that does to a person. Even if you're smiling, even if you're working, even if you seem steady. Tom later acknowledged that this transitional emotional space shaped how deeply he could commit to anything new. He wasn't broken, but he was still figuring himself out. And when you're still rebuilding your identity, love can feel both comforting and terrifying. Then Sally arrived, warm, intelligent, steady in her own way. Not just beautiful or famous, but grounded. The kind of presence that made Hollywood feel less fake. And that's exactly why she left such a lasting mark on him. Tom never framed their relationship as a dramatic one that got away. Instead, he spoke of it as something rarer, a connection that didn't need to last forever to matter forever. As the years passed, he continued to speak of her with genuine respect and affection. And his words about Sally Field carried a tenderness that surprised people, not because it sounded romantic, but because it sounded honest. He said she was exactly who people think she is. Real, kind, stronger than she ever lets on, and in an industry built on illusion, that authenticity stayed with him. But then came the turning point that sealed their fate. Magnum PI didn't just give Tom fame, it demanded everything. The schedule became relentless, the attention became constant, the pressure to deliver, to stay iconic, to keep being Tom Selleck in the public eye. It left little room for emotional stability, for slow building love, for the quiet work relationships need in order to survive. Sally, at the same time, was evolving rapidly too, stepping into performances that would earn her critical acclaim and redefine her image entirely. Their lives weren't moving backward. They weren't running from each other. They were racing forward in different directions. So their romance didn't explode. It didn't collapse. It simply faded quietly, like a song lowering in volume until you suddenly realize it's gone. And what makes this story feel so haunting is that there was no villain, just timing. Now, decades later, Tom doesn't speak of Sally Field with regret. He speaks of her with gratitude, because she represents a moment in his life when possibility was still wide open, when the future wasn't written yet, and when love still felt like something you could stumble into without planning. Some people come into your life for a season, he reflected. They're not meant to stay forever, but they matter forever. As the world fell in love with Tom Selleck, the star, Tom Selleck the man was building something far quieter off screen. And the truth is, his most defining decisions were never about roles or fame. They were about responsibility. Years before Magnum PI made him a household name, Tom had already taken on a kind of commitment many people never associate with Hollywood. In 1971, he married Jacqueline Ray, a model and actress, at a time when he was still grinding through auditions and small opportunities. These weren't glamorous years, they were uncertain years. The kind of years where a career feels like a gamble you're not sure you can win. Their marriage lasted 11 years, ending in 1982. And while Tom's stardom would soon explode, what stood out most about that chapter wasn't fame at all. It was fatherhood. During that marriage, Tom made a decision that revealed something deep about his character. He adopted Jacqueline Ray's son, Kevin Shepard, who had been born in 1966. This wasn't symbolic, it wasn't for appearances, it was a full commitment. The choice to become a real father, not a distant figure. Kevin took Tom's surname and was raised as his own. And even when the marriage ended and Tom's career demands grew, his loyalty to Kevin stayed steady. That was the pattern of Tom Selleck's life. When he commits completely. Kevin would later build his own identity in music, becoming the drummer for the American rock band Tonic, which found major success in the late 1990s with songs that defined a generation. Tom didn't try to pull him into acting, didn't try to control his path. He supported him quietly with the kind of pride that doesn't need attention to be real. And then, after his first marriage ended and his professional life began accelerating, Tom found love again. Not in a flashy Hollywood way, but in a way that felt unexpectedly grounding. On August 7, 1987, at the height of his global fame from Magnum PI, he married Jilly Joan Mack, an English actress and dancer born in 1957. They met in Britain, where she was performing in the stage musical Cats. It was almost the opposite of a celebrity cliché. A world-famous TV star drawn to someone outside the usual Hollywood spotlight. And by all accounts, their connection was immediate, rooted not in fame, but in shared values and mutual respect. This marriage marked a turning point. Tom became fiercely protective of his personal life, not because he had something to hide, but because he had something to protect. He resisted the constant exposure that destroys so many relationships in the industry. He didn't want his family turned into entertainment. And then came the moment that sealed his priorities forever. On December 16, 1988, Tom and Jilly welcomed their daughter, Hannah. Becoming a father in his 40s didn't just soften him, it reshaped him. It gave him a new kind of purpose. Tom famously chose to slow down professionally when it mattered, stepping back from relentless career momentum because he wanted to be present for Hannah's formative years. In Hollywood, that choice is rare, and it explains why Tom Selleck always felt different from the typical star. He didn't chase attention, he managed it. He didn't live for the spotlight, he used it, and then went home. Hannah grew up largely shielded from public life, raised with discipline, humility, and the belief that fulfillment comes from passion and hard work, not celebrity. She went on to become an accomplished competitive equestrian, earning recognition in show jumping rather than following her father into acting. And when you put all of this together, you begin to understand why Tom Selleck's story with Sally Field was never a scandalous lost love. It was simply a chapter in the middle of transformation, before he fully became the man who would guard his private life like it was sacred. After Magnum PI made Tom Selleck a global icon, Hollywood could have easily trapped him in one shape forever. The charming private investigator, the mustache, the effortless confidence, the safe leading man everyone recognized instantly. But Tom never wanted to be frozen in time. Even at the height of his television fame, he resisted being typecast. Instead of repeating the same character in different costumes, he chose roles that allowed him to grow. And that decision, quietly, is part of what made his career last when so many others faded. He transitioned into film with surprising success, proving he wasn't only a television star. He showcased romantic leading man charisma in Three Men and a Baby, one of the highest-grossing films of the 1980s. Suddenly, audiences saw him not just as an icon, but as someone who could carry a movie screen with warmth and humor. Then came a string of projects that showed different sides of him. Mr. Baseball, In and Out, High Road to China, roles that played with charm but also tested his range. Yet it was in westerns that Tom Selleck revealed something deeper. In Quigley Down Under, he brought authenticity, quiet strength, and moral clarity, the kind that feels earned, not performed. His presence fit the genre naturally, like he belonged to a classic era of Hollywood's storytelling. There was something in him that felt old-fashioned in the best way, steady, honorable, unflashy. He didn't need big speeches to look powerful. He made power feel calm. That commanding physical presence mattered, of course. But what truly set him apart was his understated acting style. He was especially suited to stories about resilience, justice, and men who carry pain without turning it into a spectacle. And as the years moved on, Tom didn't disappear the way many stars of his era did. He adapted. In the 2000s, he returned to television with renewed purpose, taking on more mature, introspective roles. One of the most respected chapters of his career came through his portrayal of Jesse Stone in a series of made-for-TV films. As Jesse Stone, Tom gave audiences something raw and human, a man flawed, quiet, lonely, introspective, and still powerful. These films weren't about glamour, they were about morality, loneliness, redemption, and the weight that time puts on a person's soul. And Tom didn't just act in them, he helped shape the character's tone and development, showing that his artistic integrity went deeper than simply reading lines. Then, during the 2007 to 2008 television season, he stepped into the world of Las Vegas as A.J. Cooper, adding grounded realism to a show filled with glitter, temptation, and high-stakes conflict. His presence brought emotional gravity to an environment built on speed and spectacle, exploring themes like loyalty, ambition, and moral dilemmas under pressure. But the most defining late career role was still ahead. In 2010, Tom Selleck became Frank Reagan, the police commissioner and family patriarch in Blue Bloods. This role showcased his gravitas, leadership, and moral authority, and it resonated deeply with audiences who saw him as a symbol of principled strength. For more than a decade, he anchored that series with a steady conviction. Not flashy, not loud, just solid. The kind of stability viewers trusted. And that's what Tom Selleck became over time. Not just a star, but a presence. A reminder that endurance in Hollywood is not about staying young. It's about staying real, which brings us back to Sally Field again. Because when you understand the life Tom built, you understand why he speaks of her the way he does. Not as a scandal, not as gossip, as something true. When people talk about Tom Selleck and Sally Field, they often speak in whispers, like it's some hidden Hollywood secret. But the truth is almost more heartbreaking than scandal, because nothing bad happened. Their relationship didn't end with betrayal. It didn't end with cruelty. It didn't collapse under ugly headlines. It ended the way some of the realest love stories end, quietly. They were linked around 1979, a pivotal time in Tom's life. He had recently separated from his first wife, and even though he carried himself with calm strength, he was still navigating what it meant to be on his own again, not broken, but changing, trying to understand who he was when marriage was no longer the frame around his life. And into that space came Sally. She wasn't just famous, she was warm in a way that felt human, intelligent, present. She carried her own ambition, her own longing to break free from the boxes Hollywood tried to trap her in. She knew what it was like to be underestimated and to still keep going. They understood each other in that way. Even though they never starred together in a major film, they moved through the same world, the same era, the same professional pressure of trying to become more than what audiences first thought you were. Tom remembered that part with a kind of tenderness. Both of them had been climbing. The difference, he admitted, was that Sally had already reached a plateau he was still aiming for. The detail matters because it explains the imbalance that sometimes exists even in love. When one person is already established and the other is still reaching, the future can feel uncertain, and uncertainty can create distance without anyone ever intending it. Then Tom got Magnum PI and everything accelerated. Suddenly, his life wasn't just busy, it was consumed. Fame came with schedules, scrutiny, and demands that left little room for emotional steadiness. At the same time, Sally's career was evolving rapidly too, heading toward the critical acclaim that would soon redefine her entirely. Tom later admitted something that sounded simple, but carried so much truth. They weren't moving away from each other exactly. They were moving forward in different directions. And that's why their story became Hollywood lore. Because it wasn't ruined by something dramatic, it was stolen by timing. Years later, Tom still spoke of Sally Field with deep respect. He didn't use polished public relations compliments. He spoke like someone remembering a person who genuinely mattered. He said Sally was exactly who people think she is. Real, kind, stronger than she ever lets on. And the way he said it mattered because it wasn't the voice of a man trying to rewrite history. It was the voice of a man finally at peace with what happened. He didn't romanticize it like a tragic epic. He framed it like a truth of life. Some people come into your life for a season. They're not meant to stay forever, but they matter forever. And in a world where relationships often become tabloid currency, that kind of respect is almost shocking. So the truth Tom Selleck finally told wasn't some explosive confession. It was something quieter and far more revealing. He didn't regret Sally Field. He appreciated her. He carried her memory like you carry a chapter of your life that shaped you, even if it wasn't the final story. At 80 years old, Tom Selleck is no longer living for applause. That's the quiet truth behind why he finally spoke more openly about his Sally Field. When a man reaches that age, the noise of the world starts to fade, and what remains are the moments that were real, the moments that shaped you, the people who didn't stay forever, but somehow stayed inside you. For most of his life, Tom protected his privacy like it was sacred. He wasn't the kind of celebrity who fed the press little pieces of his heart just to stay relevant. He built a career on steadiness, on discipline, on control. Not cold control, but the kind that comes from a man who understands how easily fame can destroy the things that truly matter. And when you live that way, you learn to keep certain stories quiet, not because they're shameful, but because they're personal. Sally Field was never a headline for him. She was never a story to sell. She was a human connection during a season when he was still figuring out who he was going to become. And that season mattered because it was the gap between one life and another. He had separated from his first wife. His world was shifting emotionally, even if he didn't show it publicly. Then Magnum PI arrived, and suddenly the world expected him to be unshakable, the confident, smiling man who had it all together, the kind of a star people could project fantasies onto without ever seeing the complicated truth underneath. But no one becomes an icon without paying a price. Tom's life became relentless. Fame demanded his time, his energy, his availability. Sally, at the same time, was moving forward in her own powerful direction, reshaping her career and proving she was far more than what early television had allowed her to be. So their relationship didn't explode, it dissolved. And here is what makes Tom's reflections so revealing. He didn't speak about Sally with the tone of a man rewriting the past to make himself look better. He spoke about her with softness, with respect, with something that almost felt like quiet gratitude. Because when you get older, you stop asking, why didn't it last? And you start asking, what did it give me while it existed? Tom looked back and didn't call it tragedy. He called it timing. He didn't call it regret. He called it a moment of possibility. He didn't call Sally Field a lost love. He spoke of her as a real person in an industry that often isn't real. And that's why this story still holds people's attention. Not because it's dramatic, but because it's relatable. How many of us have met someone at the wrong time? How many of us have felt something genuine only to watch life pull two people in separate directions? Tom Selleck's story with Sally Field became what might have been because it was never poisoned. It was never corrupted. It simply ended before it could become permanent. And maybe that's exactly why it stayed clean enough to remember fondly. At 80, Tom doesn't need to protect his image the way younger stars do. He's already proven everything. He's already built a legacy. What he wants now is honesty. Not the loud kind, but the kind that feels like a man finally exhaling. Because some truths are not meant to shock the world. They're meant to settle the heart.